Hey everybody, welcome to the Blendr Report, where news meets rational thinking. I'm your host, Jonathan Harvey. This is your co-host, Liam DeBoer, and today we have a special guest, Sam Cooper. Sam has been a prominent investigative journalist for over 15 years. He's best known for his investigative work on foreign interference, corruption, and organized crime, particularly concerning China's influence in Canada. His career has included roles at The Province, the Vancouver Sun, and Global News. Recently, he left Global News to start his own independent journalism platform called The Bureau. Sam is also a best-selling author of a book called Willful, Blindness, which is a deep dive into the Canada-China relations. Sam, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to our chat. So, your book, Willful Blindness, lays out how Canadian politicians, casinos, banks, real estate, and our immigration programs are all being kind of subverted by international criminal organizations, as well as even some foreign governments, such as the Chinese Communist Party. So, could you lay out how that's all connected through the Vancouver model and kind of what that is, the Vancouver model?
The Vancouver model was a term coined by an Australian professor who was reading my reporting in the Vancouver Sun back in 2017. And I revealed through government sources that there was just this massive casino money laundering scam going on, targeting British Columbia government casinos. I ultimately learned that billions of dollars in drug cash was being washed in Canadian government casinos in Vancouver through the scheme of underground banking. And so what that is in really basic terms is there are diaspora communities from China worldwide. And unfortunately, the Chinese government has encouraged, even directed gangsters in those communities to be involved in illicit activities for a lot of complex reasons. But on the casino side, you can be a wealthy industrialist, like a shipbuilder or a fentanyl trafficker in China, and you want to get your money out abroad for various reasons. You you just fly to Vancouver, and a triad that's one of these secret Chinese mafia members will meet you in a parking lot, give you $500,000 in a duffel bag of cash, and you can take that into the government casino, which is very closely related to the triad through employees on the inside. And they accepted that cash. So that's Vancouver model transaction one. Transaction two, to make it simple, you're the gangster that has gambled that cash in the casino, and you pay the triad back inside China, where your own money is. Why it's done like that is because China has these capital controls where you're not allowed to, of course, legally send your money, in a bank wired in Vancouver or Las Vegas. So you do this underground gangster cash transaction. And to take it just one step further, what that does is it facilitates the movement and laundering of drug cash worldwide for these triads that are, on the one hand, laundering their cash, and they're helping in a symbiotic relationship these Chinese nationals that want to get their money out underground.
How complicit do you think the Canadian government and the Chinese government are in letting this happen? Or are they playing an active role, or are they just kind of turning a blind eye?
Well, what I learned from when I broke this in 2017, I didn't know how complicit the Chinese government or the Chinese Communist Party, which is the government of China, is. Eventually, I learned. So we're now in 2024. Within the past 2-3 years, I learned and proved to my own satisfaction through government sources, Canada, Taiwan, United States, and elsewhere, that it's not only I or investigative reporters that say the Chinese Communist Party is not only complicit, but directing these Chinese triads, right? So there are for strategic reasons. And so if we're talking about the Canadian government, that's another story. Certainly, I believe, and I think I can prove at this point that Canadian officials have turned a blind eye for financial, let's just say, the best way you could look at it for the corrupt people in Canada is that they believe that trade from China is so important to our economy that they'll turn a blind eye to what I discovered in Vancouver, this billions of dollars of drug cash, fentanyl cash, washing through BC's regulated economy, right? Boosting real estate. So there are politicians that turned a blind eye. But I believe that there's politicians that, worse than that, are literally in old school corruption. That is, They've got cash offshore from triad members, etc. And so just to focus back on your question, one, the Chinese Communist Party, right to the top, is directing this. I now have U.S. government officials telling me this for strategic gain. They want people in North America to be dying from fentanyl overdoses. They want to be making money from that, and so that's that. I can never, even when I'm saying it now, I can never stop being shocked, right?
It sounds insane, yeah.
It's insane because why are we still doing, above board, supposedly diplomatic relations with a government that's involved in organized crime? But to the last part of your question, yeah, I think there are governments worldwide that essentially have been corrupted or captured, largely, South Pacific Islands, Latin American countries. But I believe, and I argue that Canada is getting wobbly and closer to that zone of, the danger of being deeply corrupted by triads that are directed by the Chinese Communist Party.
So these triad groups, just how big of a scale are they operating on? I know the one that you mentioned in the book kind of throughout is the Big Circle Boys. Are they still the prominent group that is running that kind of ring?
Yeah, there's like, just to take a step back, like triads are these secret Chinese mafia societies that are largely based on sort of hometown relationships throughout China. They migrated, into Hong Kong and became very powerful and global there. And so we have the Big Circle Boys that I talk about a lot. They started reportedly from, rogue Red Guards that were at war with the Chinese government, back in the 60s and 70s, and went to Hong Kong. But today, the experts say Big Circle just means a China-based transnational criminal organization. Okay. So you got Big Circle Boys that are global, and then you've got, the main triads are Hong Kong and Taiwan. So we have the Sun Yat, which is reportedly the biggest triad in the world, still 14K. You've got ones in Taiwan, like the United Bamboo, who are essentially a Beijing proxy. I write about that. And then they all kind of work together. And this is interesting because it's based in Canada. International high-level law enforcement says leaders of these various triads sometimes form something called the company, which is, if we're looking at this in the Italian organized crime old school model, this would be like the commission of 5 families in New York getting together. Sometimes they're at war, sometimes they're together. So the company, why this is important is Chai Lap-se, who was or is the boss of the company, lives in Markham, Ontario. Or lived, right? He's in jail in Australia now. But you've got the leaders of the highest level, I'm just going to call it the highest level, most sophisticated, most government-connected criminal organization in the world. That's this network of Chinese triads led out of Canada, right? That's another thing that I can't stop shocking myself by saying, for you guys living in Toronto, yeah, in Markham, Ontario, you have the world's leading Chinese gangsters. So Chai Lap-se, there's other ones now. Some of your viewers will know about that, the crazy Markham illegal mansion casino story,
right? Yeah.
Which is on the cover of my book, Willful Blindness. Yeah. It's the biggest gang in the world, and it's run out of Markham, Ontario, essentially, and Vancouver.
Can you break that down a little bit? Those underground casinos that are happening in these massive mansions and how those essentially get sprung up in the first place?
Yeah. So in my book, I write about a guy named Lai Changxing, who was just an early, huge, Big Circle Boy sort of associate, a worldwide smuggler that, set up in Canada when he angered the wrong people in Chinese intelligence. And so he had something called the Red Mansion back in Fujian province, which is just a ugly 4 or 5-story warehouse-like mansion, if you want to call it that. And they've got gambling inside for, government officials across China that he'd invite in there for, pleasure. So you got gambling, you have prostitution, you've got shark fin soup, you got wotai, you got everything going on. And you have Chinese security services rolling cameras and just collecting everything, right? Just old school Russian compromat. And so this is how the gangsters and the Chinese intelligence services work together to profit and keep control of everyone. And so this is happening in Canada. It happened with Lai Chang-zing back in Vancouver when he ran away from China. He very quickly started up again his enterprise in Vancouver, Canada. He was sort of the precursor of the Vancouver model. And so he had his mansion there. And actually, Richmond, BC, same activities, right? Gambling, big circle boys, unfortunately trafficked young women, and all that kind of stuff. They literally had computers where you could be gambling with someone in Macau, where the casino world is centered, and this kind of compromat activity. So the Markham illegal casino, run by a man named allegedly Wei, it just took it to a bigger and more brazen scale, as I wrote, in Willful Blindness, during the pandemic, when the BC government casinos, so that's the center of Chinese money laundering in North America, in a Canadian government regulated casino, when they're shut down, you've got this mansion in Markham, an underground casino. Of course, they're located also, there's others in Vancouver and Toronto. But this one was like a 52-room mansion. And you had, my sources indicate, you've got PLA officials flying in. You got Chinese intelligence in the room. You have gambling Canadian politicians invited. And you have the prostitution activity and the cameras rolling. So again, York Regional Police said that this generates tremendous profits for drug dealing, prostitution, and of course, just good old school, casinos are making money. And I just recently reported for the Bureau that, as I've said, there was a Red Mansion Lai Chang-zing angle to it. That is, the cameras are rolling, prostitution's happening, Canadian politicians are invited, and CSIS believed that there was compromat going on. And this ties into, Canadian election interference networks.
Of course. It's actually pretty amazing that people still fall for that. They still go. They're like, how do you, in the world we live in today, everything's being recorded. How they still believe that you're going to get away with it if you go for prostitution, gambling, whatever it is you're into, in someone else's home, regardless of what that looks like, that you're not going to be compromised for it. It's just wild. It's just such, I don't know if it's like a God complex or stupidity, maybe a little bit of both. I'm not really sure.
I mean, politicians they're smart, and yet some of them, they just got a gene in them that thinks they can get away with things. Not all. There's great politicians everywhere, but there's a lot of dirty ones.
What role? So I'm trying to kind of map the amount of business that's coming from China into Canada. And then I'm thinking about the size of the triads and sort of how the Chinese government's kind of intertwined in all of this. How significant a role does Canada play in their criminal operation by comparison to other countries? Are they doing the same thing in the US and in the UK, or is this like one of their main hubs?
Well, I mean, to jump back to how big is it? Again, I said the Sun Yan Triad, that's the biggest one in the world reportedly. Dated figures that I saw said, they have 50,000 members worldwide, right?
Wow.
And so the big circle gang now can just constitute basically mainland China criminals. So when you look at the United States, Canada, to your question, has been much more saturated and advanced, along with Australia, countries like, of course, Cambodia and countries border Singapore, Thailand, bordering China,
right?
Or Chinese organized crime basically owns them.
Yeah.
This is a fact, right? But Canada and Australia have become very much, Hong Kong, of course, Taiwan, Canada and Australia, to focus on the West, are getting into that zone where Canadian police fear that the triads are just so entrenched that there's no question. They're the number one. They're at the top of the organized crime scale, and they're involved in corruption. So Canada is, I would say, I'd argue, the Western hub of Chinese organized crime.
Wow.
And I mean, you kind of had to get out of a mental box and think Chinese organized crime can equally be run from Markham, Ontario and Vancouver as it can be run from Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Beijing. At the end of the day, the bosses are in Canada.
Yeah.
But their real bosses are political figures at the top of the Chinese Communist Party. That's the distinction. So to put it in perspective, what does that mean in terms of money? I just saw a report that, America is catching up to Canada in a bad way. Now you see that Chinese organized crime basically runs the illegal pot business in America. There's
Really?
something, yeah. So there's, I believe, 70. There was a big investigation stemming from a Department Homeland Security leak that showed something like about 100 illegal grow ops in Maine, of all places, in rural Maine. And what they were worth was calculated $4.2 billion.
Jesus. Wow.
That's just about 100 illegal rural shops. And apparently they're all, set up Oklahoma, Maine, down to Florida along the I-95. So you can see the level of organization that goes into transnational Chinese organized crime.
Yeah, it's run like it's a well-oiled machine. Like, I get it. You see, especially if they're connected with their own government, which makes sense considering China's kind of got their hands in every business there. It's just one more piece on the chessboard.
Yeah.
But it's interesting because you can do things with those organizations you can't do above board. So it gives you sort of a dirty little weapon that you can use. You can weaponize against other countries, like you said, with the fentanyl trade, or if you want to, by proxy, take over neighboring countries, essentially have them under Chinese rule, but through these factions.
That's exactly it. And 2 to 3 years ago, when I was hearing this summary that you basically just gave from law enforcement sources, I was like, oh, just hold on a minute. Like, I can't quite buy that. But now literally the US government, the State Department, it's still a little bit in a classified realm, but it's coming out. They absolutely know and believe that China uses underground mafias to capture other states. We can now openly read this in the South Pacific, Papua New Guinea, Cambodia, as I've said, is reportedly a Chinese triad governed state. I just reported for the Bureau this morning that a Beijing proxy triad bought Belize.
Come on.
Purchased Belize.
Wow.
In the 1990s for the simple reason that they could, run passports out of that country and they could human smuggle. I mean, they could smuggle illegal aliens, mostly from Fujian province, Lai Ching-zing's home, into the United States, right? And so this is what, to your point, yeah, sometimes I have to go, is this politically incorrect to say that they're weaponizing immigration, they're weaponizing fentanyl, they're weaponizing mafias to capture other states? But no, this is what the US government knows and is more openly saying now.
That's wild. They pick up Belize just to use it just to pump citizens through it. That's insane. Yeah.
Well, and to your point about the whole kind of politically incorrect aspect is, I've been thinking about this a lot, is, let's say, even if you're talking about like an athlete, there's certain styles of playing a sport, and each one of those styles has its certain weaknesses, right? And so we in the West, we are very pro forward with human rights, asylum programs, immigration, and all of this. And that is part of what makes the West so great. But it doesn't mean that they're above being abused or weaponized, right? And so, how exactly is that being used? Because in the book you talk about how some of our asylum programs are being used to essentially bring in some of these even just women that end up in these casinos to be prostituted, that kind of come through our immigration and asylum programs.
Absolutely. Like in the book, I had a good understanding that the Big Circle gang was running human trafficking, and they essentially, for themselves, they just simply claimed refugee status from a top level soldier or a commander in the Big Circle gang to lower level cell members. They simply got on a plane, say in Vietnam or Thailand, ripped up their document papers, and automatically claimed asylum as soon as they landed in Canada, as if they just had a blueprint. And they did. They would claim, I'm a democracy activist in Guangzhou, and the government is after me, right? And which was pure BS, because very soon after, the police would see them meeting with Chinese officials in Vancouver or something like that. So that was just a very simple scheme that still works, probably, if we're looking at the US southern border. But obviously, they're a lot more sophisticated. And again, I reported in the Bureau this morning, I got a historical, but I think still very relevant document called Passports of Convenience. It was by a Hong Kong-based Canadian diplomat named Brian McAdam. And he literally wrote exactly what you said. He said, we're an open society. The triads are abusing our immigration system. about, he said unprecedented amounts of Chinese, the population is on the move in the early 90s. This was a warning from Hong Kong, Canadian officials. For various economic reasons, they're flowing down to Fujian province, where the Fujian leader, essentially the governor, was working with the Sun Yan triad in human smuggling operations. And so, right, this is shocking stuff. This is, by the way, the governor was Xi Jinping's. He went on to sit on the standing committee, the highest level of the Communist Party, besides Xi Jinping. So when I say that the triads and the party are connected at the top, that's what I mean. But throughout the report, which quotes American immigration officials, they say Chinese transnational crime respects no borders, respects no government, is out to corrupt anyone, and they're corrupting our immigration system. And these, desperate people, not desperate, but economic migrants seeking a better life in the United States will pay, $30,000, $40,000 a head on credit. So once they land in an American city, who do they owe? The most scary gangsters in the world. And that, I'm going to do a little not a logical leap, a cognitive leap here. I'm saying that diaspora control through gangsters leads in a direct line to the Chinese Communist police station story that we now see across the world, where you've got, surprise, Fujian gangsters working with the Fujian police to spy on communities in the West.
It also seems like a really easy way to manipulate the election, manipulate voting systems, because you're getting all these people in there. Like you said, they're not necessarily bad people. They want a better life. I'm sure a lot of them are very, very decent, looking for opportunity. But if you rack up $30,000, $40,000 in debt, I'm sure that equals a lot of things. But voting in a particular direction is definitely one of them. And it's interesting because then you can go to the government. It's not just about, hey, I'm going to give you money, do what I need you to do. It's, I can bring you 50,000, 100,000 votes too. So I wonder how big a role that has played in sort of manipulating our elections. What are your thoughts?
You wonder. You're a little bit ahead of my reporting path, because I already know the answer to your question. And I'll tell you this: I mentioned the Chinese police station story for a reason, because without naming names, I don't think it's even a scoop, because I mentioned it a few times. The people running the Chinese Communist police stations in Vancouver, Toronto, let's go ahead and add New York City, are Fujian gangsters who are working directly with the Fujian Ministry of Public Security, which is Chinese National Security Police and intelligence abroad. And not only are they spying on, threatening, coercing these people that have essentially been smuggled into North America by same gangsters, they are getting these people to donate to the politicians they want. $400 a pop, keep it under a limit. You can go to Don Valley North, you can go to North York, and you can read certain politicians' donor lists and see 400, 400, 400, 400, 400, 400, right? So people want to know where the election interference story is. And for legal reasons right now, I can't name certain names. Yeah, you've got someone that's being smuggled in, gangster from casino, gives them $400, says donate to this politician. They get a $300 tax rebate or something like that for being a political donor. Everybody wins. So there's and credit to you for making that leap of logic, which is a true leap.
Wow. So we just saw, I guess, with the Foreign Interference Election Committee that just kind of happened in Canada here. We've covered it a few times. We have our own opinions on kind of how that all went down. But what's your big takeaway from that? Was it all just kind of like a sham investigation? Did they actually get to the bottom of anything, or was it kind of just like, oh yeah, we're okay. We'll just, everything's okay. Don't worry about it. And then
yeah. I mean, since I won't be falsely modest, I'm directly involved, that the inquiry stemmed from my work, which was followed by the Globe and Mail for certain reasons. And people that watched it closely, and this will include people in the RCMP, will say, well, it's interesting that this was an inquiry run by a judge, but they only covered the stories you broke. There's a lot more to it, a lot more, right? And so I'll say that if you talked about the David Johnston special rapporteur report. That was the Trudeau administration was more than dragging their heels. They were saying the reporting's wrong and blah, 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 pure lies from the prime minister's office. And story by story, they're proven, to be true. And yet they put out this David Johnston to do a supposed independent review. And it essentially came out and said, well, the reporters got it wrong. And most of Canada wasn't even buying that, right? Because gladly, I guess there's still some trust in some media, or at least me at the time, hopefully. And so enough politicians and Canadians said, we want more. We get this commission. And it came out and it said, well, yes, we can confirm there was Chinese interference in the past 2 elections. So for me, I take that as that's halfway right. It's good that they said David Johnston, was wrong. This was a cover-up report first, and something bad is happening. They've still got, more questions to ask in the second phase. But without seeing your commentary, I think I probably agree that it's pretty much half measures so far. It's a lot worse than what has come out and what is being confirmed. And if you think about it, how can it not be worse when I'm saying that Chinese organized crime is a central tool it's a lot broader than election interference, but in election interference, literally, hopefully I can report on this in more details, underground casinos are believed to be used as funding tools for Chinese consulate operations. And this connects to, repression or, the Chinese police stations, election interference. So it's a lot worse than came out in the Hogue Commission, but at least it was something.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's kind of all daisy chained together. It's like I like to say, once you pull that thread, you can knit a sweater with all the information, right? I thought it was mainly lip service. I was kind of pissed off about the whole thing. I thought Trudeau basically was covering up his own mess. Like you said, he dragged his heels. Then he uses his friend, a family friend, David Johnston, as a special rapporteur, which was total BS. Like you said, that was embarrassing. I can't believe he did that to that kind of stained that guy's career. You know what I mean? I thought that was a pretty rotten thing to do. And then you're going to do a public inquiry that you do in private. You don't let the Conservatives or the NDP in to hear any of it, except you let the one Chinese senator be a part of the whole thing, which was super shaky to me.
You want a scoop on that?
I do.
Senator Yuan Pawu, who I write about in the book. Yeah, I mean, anyone that watches Canadian politics somewhat closely can see it's reasonable to allege Yuan Pawu, the senator from BC, is an open voice for Beijing. I don't think even he would deny that. Right? There's just so many examples. His first speech in Senate was why, China's South China Sea policy should be adhered to. Right? So, time and time again, he speaks for Beijing. I reported in the Bureau that I got a tape recording from a very, a great Chinese Canadian community source who gave me this tape where Yuan Pawu is talking to members of what is known as Beijing's United Front. So these are its influence and intelligence arm abroad that, brings together all these community associations really to weaponize them against other countries. Yuan Pawu is telling them, he literally said words to the effect that I'm going to be fighting for your rights to be involved in Beijing designated United Front associations in Canada. You shouldn't be subjected to a litmus test if you're, saying pro-China things, right? So again, This gets back to your point. Weaponizing our free and democratic system where constitutional rights, are protected, freedom of speech. Yuan Pawu is saying, I'm going to use Canada's legal system to protect your rights to be a Chinese communist voice in Canada. But the scoop here is, I knew from 2017 that the U.S. intelligence community was interested in Yuan Pawu. I informed the Hogue Commission of that while I was reporting on this story about Yuan Pawu on my tape recording, saying he's working for Beijing, essentially. And how does he get standing to sit there and be have a legal status in the inquiry? So it goes further. I'm just going to say that I'm working on an update of Willful Blindness, the 3rd edition. And if it gets through the lawyers, I'll be able to report how how much the Canadian intelligence community is concerned about Yuan Pawu. And yet, let's step back. This guy has status in our Commission on Foreign Interference, and yet CSIS is investigating him.
Yeah, it's pretty wild. Eh?
So how does he first get into this position as senator? And then also second, like, how does he stay there without any kind of pushback? Or is there pushback within the Canadian government? Or is this kind of like, yeah, we know this is happening, but we're just not concerned about it?
Was he a Trudeau appointed senator?
He was appointed by Prime Minister Trudeau in 2016. He worked at the Asia Pacific Foundation in Vancouver. And again, you can, read some of my reporting or my colleagues out in Vancouver back in 2017. He was responsible at the Asia Pacific Foundation for bringing in literally a People's Liberation Army, supposedly cultural entity called China Poly, which if you read further in the New York Times, China Poly is a front for the People's Liberation Army that's being tied to allegations of weapons shipment in other countries, etc. There were all kinds of, 5 or 6 dodgy Chinese entities that Yuan Pawu and his friends in that trade lobby brought into Canada. So you asked, how does he get into the Senate? If we're stepping back and looking at it as a potential conspiracy, he is a promoter of deep trade engagement with China. He's a friend of the Canada-China Business Council, which is sort of these corporations and law offices in Montreal, basically, that have been doing deep business, which I write a little bit about in Willful Blindness since the 90s or earlier with People's Liberation Army entities, essentially. So let's take a step back. Yuan Pawu brings a People's Liberation Army entity into Vancouver. He's a voice for, we could, we don't have him here to answer back. I've certainly tried to reach out to him a lot, but I believe the evidence suggests he's a voice for Beijing's business infiltration in Canada. And he's connected to, Canadian high-level business people that are complicit in all that activity, who would have a great deal of influence with people like Prime Minister Trudeau in who they appoint to Senate. I'm saying there's probably a case there that's why he's in Senate.
Interesting. And you can stay in the Senate until you're 75 in Canada. There's no other block. So once you're in, you're there until you hit that point. So once he's in that position, he's guaranteed. Unless he does something like wildly egregious that they can pull him on, but I doubt it. You know what I mean?
And there probably wouldn't be much of an incentive because, like you're saying, if they were to say act on that and put pressure on him or try to remove him from the Senate, that could impact trade relations with China, right? Or it could cause some sort of grift, at least some sort of diplomatic issue.
Depending on the government, certainly the Liberal Party wouldn't want to take action against the guy they appointed. The Conservative Party, I think there's probably a lot more people in the Conservative Party that want to take a look at the Senate and some reforms there that could bring accountability to a situation like this senator. But the Conservative Party, I believe, has a problem of their own in the Senate. I don't need to name the name now, but a very big problem. So they've got a problem in their own closet.
So without names, would that be in the same league of what's like same kind of group, same organization?
Chinese infiltration, same thing?
Chinese infiltration, conservative senator, not at anywhere near the level of sophistication of Yuan Pawu, but certainly my evidence is, and this is based on my own research and Canadian intelligence sources, dead center asset in the Chinese election interference.
So I'm of the mind that things don't really stay the way they are. They're always changing. It's getting worse or it's getting better, right? And so you're looking at the amount of interference that China's already had in our elections. You're looking at how they've infiltrated the Senate. You're looking at how they've infiltrated business, fentanyl. You see how everything's going. But then you also watch how Canada and our government specifically is kind of trying to brush it under the rug, right? Basically because I believe they're complicit. That's my take on it. So if I'm being logical and looking at how this is kind of moving in a linear path, it looks like it's only going to get worse. Would you agree that you feel like it's only going to get worse? And if so, what is going to happen? What does the next stage of their infiltration look like?
I'm dead set in the center of that question. I do believe that, but for my reporting, which was not easy, faced a lot of backlash, that led to the foreign interference inquiry, which there's two schools of thought. It is sort of an effort to brush things aside, but it'll be up to the Canadian citizens to keep putting pressure. It'll be up to reporters to keep digging, bringing out the facts. It'll be up to podcasters to keep this conversation in the news. And let's not just focus on some of the things we enjoy in life, like sports and entertainment. Like, this is the sovereignty of our nation. This is our livelihoods. This is our children, possibly, getting hooked on safer supply, because fentanyl is getting so bad.
Well, we
right?
actually were talking on our last episode about how now, like, what was it, 21% of kids admitted that they've tried.
25% of kids between 12 and 17 have recreationally tried opioids.
Like the diluloids or whatever they're called. It's like a $2 or $3, $5 pill now. Yeah,
Wow. That's wild.
It's wild. That really that's something that would, that's at the top of my list. Like, not to get off topic, but I mean, you start to, if China is strategically flooding the West with fentanyl, and if our governments respond with, safer supply programs that bring down the price so kids can buy like a $2 or $3, medical opioid, it's terrible. That's just it's gonna snowball. But I do believe, I'm an optimistic thinker. I'm dead persistent, and I think
I'm also optimistic.
I was going to say, I'm the lone pessimist here.
Well, I mean, like, for my work, I have to. This is my life, right? Journalism. I wanted to be like, a lawyer before, and I decided I can do probably, better work strategically as a journalist in making actual positive changes to society. I believe this is so important, and so the Hogue Commission was a big step, because we now have on the record officially China interfered. Whether we agree they're brushing it under the rug, but they can't go back from that. Right. They're going to have to put in some legal countermeasures to that. So there's hope in my mind that that can start to turn the ship a little bit. But if Canadians sit back and say that's good enough, no, it'll continue to get worse, because in my experience, China doesn't stop, right?
No.
That any strategic, they're looking for any angle. So they're already thinking of their next moves.
Right. Yeah. So you're basically of the opinion that now that we've shined a light on it, essentially, they have to be more accountable. So it may quell things for a little while, at least. Like, once you get some heat on you, you kind of back off and wait for the cops to chill out, and then maybe you make your move again. So that's kind of your thought. Yeah. I mean, speaking optimistically, I hope that that's the case. I do. But I do get a little concerned, because I find that Canadians are a little apathetic. I also find that our media is very one-sided. So sometimes it's hard for us to kind of just let people know what's going on around the world. You know what I mean? Like, it's just, we kind of feel like Canadians are sheltered a little bit because of the way our media is organized. And I think that may sort of curb our enthusiasm to maybe push back and kind of make this a bigger deal. That's what makes me think, like, I'm like you, I'm optimistic and I'm hopeful it goes that way. But because of sort of the general ambition of Canadians around stuff like this, and then our media, I am worried that it will just be a blip on the radar. Then they're going to go right back at it, kind of like you touched on.
Well, yeah, you can put exposing Chinese election interference in the same category as people in the United States would now feel with regards to, their unprecedented amount of illegal immigration at the southern border, right? And so they're seeing just, I believe, 20 times the amount of Chinese refugee claimants at San Diego at the border with Mexico. And it's totally politicized, right? So if you are the type of person that kind of subscribes to, well, the people I generally get along with tend to think this about this, right? You're going to feel very uncomfortable talking about immigration. And you're going to, I think that's what you're getting at with Canada. More than Americans, we tend to think, well, if I say that, it makes me uncomfortable inside, right? It's not even what will people think about me. We're very polite people, right? We're brought up that way. But I've sort of, I guess you could almost say in a bit of a diplomatic way, I just feel, if these things, if another state, possibly the second most powerful, the second most powerful, is weaponizing things against us, and they probably realize we're uncomfortable about confronting them, we have to confront them in a sensitive and rational way.
Yeah, it's interesting actually. Liam was talking about it yesterday, kind of the Overton window concept, and just being like, we have such a narrow Overton window in what's acceptable to talk about in society. And you're right, that was actually a better way of putting what I was trying to say. Is it's like people just won't approach these subjects. They won't lean into these topics because they don't want to be ostracized or made into a pariah, essentially, right?
Yeah, I mean, whether it's at the dinner table or at the bar or just with your friends, I don't want to be like seen as like some person that likes to lean into things and that's xenophobic, etc.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm saying, part of my job is to tell people that no, if another state thinks in a certain way and they're using something against you, and they're actually pretty much inside your mind realizing that you're uncomfortable to say something, that's part of something that's deeper than, if you feel that people look at you a certain way in your own culture.
So when you were mentioning how your work has kind of got some backlashes towards you, is that more on the, say, legal side, or is it kind of societal and culturally, like within social circles? Because even like that's something we've both experienced when you talk about these things, and like I like to think that we have a pretty rational view on them, and we try as best as we can to convey those in appropriate ways. But still, it's almost like unless you say the line, unless you say exactly what they expect you to think, then you're immediately xenophobic or you're against whatever.
We tend to over-contextualize to kind of safeguard ourselves a little bit, but I think it's this weird habit we have that I don't even want to do. But like you said, otherwise you just kind of fall into that label. You're under that umbrella of a xenophobe or something that's just a misguided label. You know what I mean? But yeah, to your point, like if you're getting the backlash, is it coming from the legal side or both, from society? Like,
yeah, it started, I would say, as a reporter in the Vancouver Sun, very similar issue. I was looking at the, very viscerally, I was part of a generation that was being priced out of Vancouver due to, I believed, and started to chase the evidence that, foreign money of undeterminate, origins was coming in, and very clearly, this was impacting real estate prices. People in Vancouver didn't, statistically didn't have the incomes to afford the homes, and yet, there's empty towers, and there's now Chinese real estate signs and blah blah blah. So I started to kind of be able to prove that this was due to money coming out of China. Then I started to prove that this was organized crime money, and our economy was being used. And at that point, very influential real estate developers and lawyers, etc., literally started to call up my editors and saying, this reporter is X or Y. I don't even like to repeat the smears because they're not true.
Yeah.
So that's a way to try to financially, get at me. Maybe they were able to block a story or two, but what I was doing was important enough. I could still push out some big stories. I keep moving. If I feel like I want to go to a new job, new place. And so, now onto the election interference story, same thing, of course. Yeah. People say if you're talking about China, it's anti-Asian racism. Or there was a one story that, where I exposed these foreign networks and how they basically sucked all our PPE out of Canada. And so there was a group of people that I now know for sure are part of China's United Front that start emailing editors and start trying to crowdfund a anti-Asian racism lawsuit against me.
Oh.
And so it does all, to your analogy of pulling the thread, now years later, I can see that not only were they doing that, but I can see that they are most definitely part of the Chinese intelligence media operation that was involved in election interference in one of the most important writings detailed in Commissioner Hoag's report. So I'm going to report more on that at the Bureau. But in a way, to your question, I've lived it because I've been sort of at the front line of a journalist exposing this, and thus become a target of these Chinese networks and a target of, I would say, the complicit Canadian law firms or business persons
Right.
involved, or the politicians that, doing my duty, as a journalist had to be named, will now be involved in lawsuits against me, which I'm saying they're more than just lawsuits. There's something bigger going on.
Interesting. So basically it's anyone with Chinese interests, whether it's regardless of where it's coming from. So it's not really as much Canadians. It's more sort of anybody that's got the Chinese interest.
We could more
side.
broadly say financial interests.
Yeah,
but
right.
China, that's
Right.
what they do. That this is how they try to buy up the world.
So bit of a dark question. Do you ever worry about like your own safety in your life, considering what you're doing and the people that are involved in this? Do you ever worry about getting to a point where they're like, hey, I gotta, like, it's do or die at this point? Do you ever think about that?
Yeah, I've had to, because after I testified, I was asked to testify in a Canadian parliamentary committee in June. Yeah, was it June or July? Summer 2023. Just on the back of my reporting, I was called to talk about China targeting politicians. And I testified that it's not just politicians, it's journalists. I've been warned by CSIS about the things I'm talking about. China was trying to discover the sources of my reporting, etc. And so I testified, and 2 to 3 days later, a Canadian National Security Unit knocked on my door in Ottawa and said they had a legal duty to tell me that they had heard of a credible threat targeting myself because of my reporting. And so this is the type of warning that would usually be given to gangsters who were unfortunately targeted by other gangs, right? In Vancouver, Toronto, Montreal, wherever. And so I, of course, your question was, how do you respond to that? Or had it happened to you? Yeah, it happened. I got consultation, with people formerly in police and security services in Canada. I upped my, personal security situation, make sure myself and my loved ones are fine. But I don't think, I don't know much more about who is behind that, because the police can't share that information. They assured me they are investigating, and I've continued to be in touch with them. What else will I say here? I will say that, I already was close to people licensed to carry firearms, law enforcement in Canada, and I've gotten closer and I've upped my, capacity, but I just don't think, I don't worry about it, but I have the right friends in the right places.
I feel like whether it's tossing these labels on people like yourself or whether it's actual direct threats, it's like I have this thing where I feel like it's not as much about trying to deal with you as the reporter as much as it is to send a message to anyone else who might be thinking about doing the same thing. Yeah. And that gets into everybody else's head of 100%. Like, okay, I won't say anything because I don't want that consequence.
100%. It happened to a journalist in Australia who's from mainland China. I believe her name is Vicky Xu. And the Ministry of State Security literally, smeared her personal and alleged intimate life all over the international, internet. And wow. She says they literally ruined her life just by personally attacking her. And, she's done her best to fight back, but that's a pure example of what you're speaking of. They literally, it's like, if we're talking medieval, they put a head on a stake and say, this is what will happen to you. There's another guy, Drew Pavlo, in a very outspoken criticism of Beijing from Australia. And they did, they did like fake emails to one of the embassies in Europe saying, Drew is going to bomb this Chinese embassy, right? They've done this to a number of journalists and activists, right? This is Chinese intelligence services targeting people. And so you're exactly right. And, my response has been to keep going and go harder. And, I don't like to beat my chest or anything, but I don't think I'm the person to, I'm not going to be scared. And like I say, I've got the right friends and the right tactics.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And that's always been my goal, at least. I can't speak for Jonathan, but that's been my goal from the beginning with all of this, is because I'm not from a traditional journalism background or anything of that nature, but I do have a keen understanding of just like human psychology, and with the whole Ash compliance test thing, like when there's enough people in a room saying that the obvious longer line is the shorter one, enough the one test subject in that room will go along with the group, right? Mm-hmm. But as soon as you put that another person in there that gives the right answer, that test subject more or less now will give the correct answer. They feel like, okay, I can actually say that thing. I'm not overwhelmed by this I'm not the sole person with this opinion.
Yeah.
And that's like, so if there's any area that I'm hopeful for on, is at least seeing that there is more and more people willing to kind of stand up and be that person in that room, just being like, okay, no, you know what? I can see obviously that this is the longer line, and I'm not gonna gaslight myself anymore into believing that.
The herd thinking in a negative sense, right?
Yeah. If you had perfect world, what would be like the first step into actually dealing with this scenario in a legitimate way?
Yeah, so I think we're not far from it, depending on the election, or maybe even, let's say, the Liberal government stays in. I don't think they wanted to put a foreign interference registry in place, which is a key step for Canada. Without getting into the weeds, I think a lot of people understand this. Conservative MP out in British Columbia, Kenny Chu, proposed a foreign agent registry, and he was the one most attacked and smeared by Chinese intelligence in the 2021 election, along with the leader Aaron O'Toole, because they were taking, a reasonable stance on China. So the Liberal government, of course, whether they're in the bag with Beijing, or whether they were just feeling, if we take any little bit of a stronger stance against Beijing, for example, think back, why did the Liberal government, sit on the whole Huawei 5G question for 3 years? Mm-hmm. Very clearly, because if, they take action against, Huawei, very quickly it leads to some countermeasure against the sitting government. So to get back to the point, we'll get the foreign agent registry. I believe that flows from the Hogue Commission findings, which are not complete yet. But that's just one step. It's an important step because if you look at the CCP police station successful prosecutions in New York, each and every one, it's like a proxy. It's a local Fujian business person, a local Fujian triad member that are involved in these threats to community members. And they are taking direction from Chinese intelligence in Beijing or, Shanghai, wherever. It can be proven on, text, WeChat, and they haven't signed up as a registered agent of a foreign government. So that's a charge, right? It may seem a bit silly, but that's a charge. So once you got that in Canada, now that's the baby step towards actually, the police feeling like they can even lay a charge on someone or investigate deeper because you've got that registry, which is just the first step. But to your question, like I've always argued, and I did in the book, that Canada has no RICO Act. The RICO Act is what the Anti-Racketeering Act broke the Italian mafia when it was getting too powerful in the United States. And I argue we need that in Canada because we've become a home for, of course, the triads, the Mexican cartels, Iranian Hezbollah networks, I'm told are 1, 2, 3 in Canada. And work together. And not to diss Italian, organized crime is still pretty strong in Canada. The bikers, but it goes street gangs. So we need racketeering laws. And I'd say to work together with foreign agent registry type laws.
So basically, foreign agent registry opened the door. It gave them a bit of power to sort of do some enforcement. And then your thought is then go to RICO or something similar. So then you can actually start taking these things down. And it's interesting. So based on that path, it seems like America followed a similar path, right? Would it be fair to say that any logical government would move in that direction if they were trying to get ahead of this? And based on the fact that the Hogue Commission happened, that we got the foreign agent registry going, that the RICO Act essentially, would you think that is all but given that it's going to happen?
The RICO Act, I think that's just me probably right now saying this is what's needed.
Yeah.
Possibly even more than the foreign agent registry, because as I'm arguing, transnational organized crime is the proxy tool for Iran, for Russia, for China. To me, that's the real problem. Organized crime has a deep foothold. As I've said before, the story of all these cars disappearing from Toronto and ending up in Dubai. This is because, organized crime, transnational, is very deep into Canada. So, yeah, like I say, I think the red foreign agent registry is the low-hanging fruit now. It almost has to happen, and I'll take that. That's a win. It's a step, but it's only a baby step. There's a, compared to the bigger thing, not to get into the weeds too much, but, my friends at a high level in the RCMP, et cetera, will say Canada's Charter of Rights, a bit of a sacred cow, because again, it's used by transnational. You talked about other states targeting us, seeing our weaknesses. It's very difficult for Canada to, operate with American or Australian police in targeting the Sinaloa cartel or Chinese triads, because we can barely get wiretaps on these networks that are set up in Canada, because any criminal case, any money laundering case, Charter of Rights sort of arguments will be used. And we just have, our law enforcement has a big hill to climb with regards to how easy it is for the defense side to get, so much disclosure in records, or just, I feel like I don't want to get too far into the legal weeds, but we have a big sort of legal issue as well, broader than just putting, some strong laws like RICO or the foreign agent registry in place.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges I have, and you and I were chatting about this yesterday, is like governments are complicit and they are part of the reason why we got here. But now we have to depend on those same people to put the solutions in place and actually enforce them, which doesn't give me a whole lot of confidence. You know?
No, and that's why I think you would need a changing of the guard, because you're never going to get people to implicate themselves, because to properly go against these organizations and these issues, they would have to also uncover the fact that they've been turning a blind eye to it for almost a decade now, right? So
that's true. And it brings to mind when you said that, I mean, a big part of this is we also need an independent anti-corruption body, which is something that when Britain was still, in charge in Hong Kong, they realized triads are so deep into the government, we need an independent, they called it the ICAC. And so, what I've already been hearing, there's so many Canadian politicians involved in this stuff, the foreign interference. Our police and intelligence basically are powerless to go against them. It's just too politically sensitive. So we need, in addition to a foreign agent registry, we need an independent anti-corruption commission.
Yeah, see, I agree with you. I just think I feel like everything we're doing in this country, maybe it's all countries, maybe it's just politics in general because they're so bloated these days, but I feel like they'll find a way to infiltrate it and control it in some sense. You know what I mean? It's just...
Well, no, I'm with you on that, because we have something called NCIRA, which is, a body to look into Canadian intelligence. And my sources back from the 90s said that thing was totally captured, right? Yeah. It's just another... you put in another body to look at something. And so, yeah, the real key is does it have teeth? And do you have some Elliot Ness type people that they don't care, right?
Yeah.
I'd like to think that in journalism, I'm the type of person that I don't care if you don't think I'm a nice guy, or you think, politically you don't agree with me. You think, right? I'm just these are the facts. The public interest is important enough. People are dying of fentanyl. Let's report who's behind it. Right. And so you need people that are empowered. You need a bit of a change of culture in Canada that people, I credit the United States of having those types of people that, they're not going to be politically influenced. They'll go after politicians.
Right. So sort of a bit of a different direction with this question is censorship in Canada. So you're saying a lot of things that the mainstream media maybe won't say or doesn't want you to say, or politicians don't want you to say. And we're also noticing a big rise in censorship in Canada, whether it's Bill C-11, C-18, or C-63, which I hope does not pass because it's insane. But have you noticed censorship play a role in your voice, or has it suppressed your voice? Because personally, I've definitely seen it, and so have you.
I haven't looked at all. I mean, only at the basic level. I don't know why. Maybe I'm just scared to. I haven't even looked into these new acts you're speaking about. I'll just say plainly, like, other people like Terry Glavin, others, known Canadian journalists have said, I would not trust this Liberal government, those type of laws. I just don't. There's enough evidence that.
Well, there's even a great example of the hypocrisy is like, say, for instance, okay, you brought up the Charter of Rights and how it is a sacred cow and a lot of people don't want to ever overstep that boundary. I'm typically actually one of those people. But in my head, a precedent was set with, say, the Freedom Convoy. It's like, okay, even let's take the Liberal government at their face value and say 100%, we'll give you all of the credit in the world. Your intelligence was correct. Your view on it was correct. Let's say this was a national security threat. Well, there's no chance that you can now say that that was a bigger, if that's the line for a national security threat, there's no way that you can now say that these sorts of scenarios aren't a larger national security threat for that. So if you're willing to overstep that line and go past the Charter of Rights for that protest, then how are we not, like, if you can, through FinTrack, if you can freeze the grandma's bank account that donated $20 to the truckers, then how can you not use those same powers to deal with these criminals?
Yeah,
right?
no, I agree 100%. That's a slam dunk case that, without getting into a whole conversation about the convoy, very clearly they came down with a hammer and overstepped, financially. They got, maybe there were some bad apples in there. I was told there were some bad apples in that movement. It was largely, Canada based, but there probably were some bad apples. But financially, the Liberal government wanted, as I was told, they wanted their Tiananmen Square moment. They wanted to roll a tank past the Parliament Hill. Literally, they were sending messages about why can't we just send a tank out there? And pretty clearly, I mean, I was told by a very credible police source that the RCMP was being told, can you find us enough on a timeline to sort of prove how nefarious this convoy is, so we can take these strong measures. So to your point, I think you're saying, well, yeah, politically, obviously, they think their political enemies, the Conservatives are a little bit close to this movement. Let's crush it. And they overstepped very clearly. Again, I'm not saying that there weren't some, practically speaking, it was a big problem, and there were some nefarious elements. There are some dangers there. But yeah, they overstepped. And yet with China, they're not stepping at all. So it's very clear. They know, I believe they know some of these fentanyl kingpins that are close to their party. Why aren't they taking action against their bank accounts?
Yeah, I just mean, why aren't they, and to further that point, like, why aren't they taking action against any of it? And I guess it's things like that. Like, you can make that connection pretty easily, but it's stuff like that, and just how Trudeau's managed this public inquiry. Obviously, they're complicit in it in some way. Hogue says, well, they definitely manipulated elections, but it didn't make a big difference. Like, how can you possibly say that?
And also at the same time said they didn't get that the government didn't give them enough information.
Yeah, we didn't get all the data though either. So it's the whole thing. But my point is, it's like, because of those things, it's hard to have faith in the institution and that it's going to do the right thing, or that they're just not completely in bed with these guys. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I'm with you on that. Like I say, it's a lot worse than even I know. And I know it's much, 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 much worse. Just as an example, I'm told that you're talking about Hogue saying, oh, they only maybe made a difference in a few ridings. I'm told that they targeted up to 50 ridings. Okay. So across Canada, we have 338 ridings in an election, about 50, and it'll only get bigger with each election, right? It'll only get bigger. Literally, one of the key documents in the Hogue report said, pointing to that key BC riding, that the United Front was so emboldened by their success in Richmond, BC, that the danger was they'd increase their activity. So yeah, no, just on a scale of ridings, it's way worse than the Hogue Commission found, I believe. And as I say, if you're talking about organized crime as center of all this activity, it's that order of a magnitude worse than they've even, admitted this far.
Is there anything else that comes to mind that you think is worth highlighting, that is going on behind the scene that we haven't heard of with relation to the commission?
You mean like on a technical basis, or just things that are happening in corruption that hasn't
Well,
been reported?
anything that's not being reported that's in the sort of election corruption space that maybe not coming out or that you know of, or just kind of what would be enough? Like, is there any other stories you have that would convince Canadians how bad it is, because we know we're not getting the full story?
I'm trying to think. I mean, what I can say is I've reported quite a bit by now. I know quite a bit. And yet people that have proven 100% accurate tell me it's a lot worse still.
Right.
They say things like, you only know, that is Canadians, and you only know not even the half of how bad it is with regards to China. And also, India, Russia. Strangely, Russia apparently isn't all that interested in, in interfering in Canada. But China, which makes you think, Russia is going right for the jugular, the real enemy, the United States. And China, it's like they're taking a stepping stone approach in Canada before, their real enemy, the United States. So how much worse does it get? I reported on a document that never came out in the commission, of course, because I hadn't reported at Global News. I'll briefly talk about it. I obtained a CSIS document from 2019, June 2019, that said China was calibrating its election interference operations targeting the 2019 election. So that's a few months ahead. They were calibrating their support for Justin Trudeau to reflect their displeasure with Mun Wanzhou's detention, right? So what this says is, of course, Trudeau is their guy. They didn't expect the Liberal Party to actually, arrest Mun Wanzhou and, follow our legal obligations to the United States. They expected us to let her go. The Liberals couldn't quite do that. And so China, they reached out their tentacles into our 2019 election, still supporting the Liberals, still supporting Trudeau, but supporting some NDP, some Conservatives to calibrate and try to get, I believe the document didn't go this far, but others reported they were seeking minority governments in Canada. So did that level of sophistication or that level of, calibrated support across the parties come out in the Haute Commission? No. What else was in that document that I find shocking? I don't know. Like, you tell me. The document says, intelligence that CSIS has learned of says that Beijing could consider assassinating or exfiltrating Mun Wanzhou if she was extradited to the United States.
Wow.
Right?
And what was her implication in everything? Like how
the chief financial officer of Huawei, who gets arrested in Vancouver, and so if the fear was that if she's shipped to the United States, she'll have to cooperate with the U.S. government and reveal on the record that Huawei is an international intelligence op, right? Yeah. So this, again, sometimes I look at myself and go, when I read that China was willing to assassinate potentially Mun Wanzhou in Canada, yeah, that's shocking, right? That is shocking to me. And yet where it never came out in the inquiry. It never came out in the inquiry that this was driving the election interference in 2019. It never came out in the inquiry that Justin Trudeau, on the record, according to CSIS, is supported by China. So yeah, that's just, in a nutshell, that's one thing that there's so many more, but that's what's coming to my mind right now. It's like just very obvious that the sophistication of what they're doing is way more than came out in the inquiry.
Well, their capacity to calibrate, like that's an interesting thing to me, because basically, like you said, they have their tentacles in enough parties, and you touched on the Conservative Party earlier, not surprised with the NDP, that they're basically able to manipulate the election to get the exact result they want. That is pretty concerning.
I mean, that is what our intelligence agency, right? So if you got some viewers in the United States, what if the CIA said, Russia has the ability to choose what type of government and to, spread their support around?
That's wild.
It's not saying that I've never read anything that said that China succeeded in, definitely doing that, but that's what they were aiming at. And that's our intelligence agency that has the power to wiretap people. If they're telling us that China has that type of conspiracy, that type of calibration,
Well, look at also what happened. Look at the result.
the result
Is
equaled
exactly
it.
what exactly that's
which
wild.
doesn't equal that still doesn't equal that they
Could be
succeeded.
correlation, not
Exactly.
causation.
Sure,
Exactly.
but it also makes it hard to believe that, like, hey, well, they manipulated a little bit of the election, but not much. It's like, I mean, if it's a bit of a smoking gun in a sense, but yeah, I agree with it. You can't confirm 100%.
You can confirm, I believe, that CSIS believes that's what they were trying to accomplish.
Yes.
Did they succeed is still an open question, as you say.
Yeah.
But
So
they
what-
try.
It's interesting. So one of the things I would say is, Trudeau pulled a shotgun on elections a couple times. The only time you do that is if you think you can win a majority, or if you think you're going to go down and you're going to sink and you want at least a minority. But that's really not what I think Trudeau's ego says. I think he believes he was going to get a majority. So following that logic, if they were involved in 2019 and 2021, and he's pulling that lever under my assumption to get a majority government, and he's getting a minority both times, it stands to reason they do have the influence, because he would have enough of his own intelligence and his own people saying, hey, if you go now, you're probably going to get a majority, or here's your best chance. And the last election, literally nothing changed. So it does, in my opinion, it leads me to believe that they are actually they are far more infiltrated into that group and have a lot more influence than we're being told. That's my assumption. That's how I'm feeling.
Well, I mean, and it brings up a thought. It's not 2019 and 21. As I've reported at the Bureau, the evidence is they supported him from when Justin Trudeau from 2013.
Yep.
Wow.
I can now draw, again, let's just very quickly put a circle around that. Markham illegal casino, my story showed that this alleged organized crime boss running it is part of an Anhui United Front Friendship Association in Toronto, which also includes a director who's a Liberal Party riding boss in Markham. It also includes, a person that was a Liberal Party candidate. And these types of people are on the record at a big fundraiser in 2015, months before the election, with John McCallum, the Markham MP, with Bill Blair, the incoming star candidate. So I'm saying I can draw the concrete evidence of, people related to an underground organized crime casino fundraising for Justin Trudeau months ahead of the election. So you ask, how close are they? How close could China be to his inner circle? I'm told Canadian intelligence believes people in his office could be compromised.
Wow.
I can see with my own eyes and diaspora community sources and documents which seem to support that. And so can China achieve, again, back to our point, can they achieve, minority results? It looks like they're pretty close to that level.
Yeah.
If you've got people inside the Prime Minister's office, right? Yeah, that's a lot of control.
Yeah, that's deep. If you got that, you got to imagine how much more you've infiltrated across the entire, that whole foundation of what goes into
The
kind of
party.
winning an election. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's wild.
Yeah, well, and I've always been very much intrigued in the idea space, the philosophical and ideological side of all of this stuff that happens. So there is that element of, when it comes to the socialist states, or even Mao, Stalin was very similar as well, as this idea that okay, the goal is I want to be that Marxist that brings this doctrine to the world. And so it's not, there's almost, there's an ideological element to it above just the pure, just kind of geopolitical chess playing of just pure power and economic power. It's kind of okay, can we subvert them ideologically? And you do see guys like Stephen Gubeau and stuff in Parliament openly state that he's a socialist. And so you kind of see this, they're running in these same circles with these, and you go okay, is this ideological capture, kind of that
yeah,
point where,
it's interesting. It gives it one more, it gives the it sort of gives the idea of China infiltrating Canada one more prop, one more thing to stand on, because it's a lot of what the Liberal government's pushing these days seems to be more in that space, a bit of I don't want to say not fully Marxist, but it kind of is in that direction, which kind of
a lot of their principles are guided by that. Even if you look at their idea on crime, this was a very Marxist idea that, if society was properly organized, there would be no such thing as crime, that all crime is essentially a protest against a oppressive system.
So defund the police.
Yeah.
So defund the
Yeah.
police, but then you even see what's going on with a lot of their policies right now. And I know we're getting kind of a little sidetracked from the corruption angle, but it is, you see these policies get put in place where it's the open bail reforms. We're not going to crack down on that idea, because then, if we built this equitable society, then these people would actually just be at peace and there would be no crime. And so, yeah, to me, there's that element as well. That's a big puzzle piece to it.
The commonality, like behind the authoritarian state, Marxist, ideology, and the actual tactical realpolitik is the United Front system. So if you see a Stephen Guilbeault, having meetings with green organizations in China, it's proven, and I've written a little bit about it. These are, they're actually, they may call themselves green, but they're United Front and Chinese Ministry of State Security entities. And so whether Stephen, the MP, really he probably believes
I think
that he's doing the right thing.
Yeah.
But on the China side, it's a United Front activity. Yeah. You try to reach out to any interest group in the world and co-opt it, right? Mm-hmm. So they try to, people watching, may say, oh, you're going too broad here. No, this is part of the United Front, Leninist, thinking mm-hmm. that China adopted. If someone's interest is X, you get close to them by being interested in X if you're from China, and make them feel like, we're together. And that's how you, grow your United Front. And, to square it off, people that, you can't capture are just classed enemies, right?
Yeah,
they're, boom, they're to be attacked. United Front, just bring everyone as close to you as you can.
Yeah.
It's just like a global subversion campaign.
You
mentioned that a lot of these guys are U.S.'s number one enemy for these guys. So do you think that Canada is a stepping stone for China, and that they're planning a much bigger sort of more mobilized attack? I mean, especially when you look at the fentanyl, I think like the amount of fentanyl being shipped into the United States from China every year is enough to kill everybody in the world 4 times. It's such a wild amount of fentanyl. So you think that they're basically setting up shop here to move their attack south?
Yeah, they literally in their own documents write that they want to be the world leader by 2049.
Yeah.
And so they have all these 5-year plans. And again, it's almost like, they aim to get a certain result in Canada's government. Did they achieve it or not? Doesn't really matter. They say they want that result. They're trying to do it. We're on the receiving end of their efforts. So yeah, Canada is, I believe it's, pretty much, because I've heard it from experts in Taiwan and the United States, etc. They want to divide Canada from our strongest natural ally, the United States. And so how would that, their main goal immediately is to retake Taiwan. So you can think about it like in the Middle East, wherever you sit on what's going on, with Hamas and Israel, I think we can say that hostile states have succeeded in sort of dividing Canada from our allies in the United States on that one. Mm-hmm. China would be trying to do the same thing. If they attack Taiwan, they don't want other countries joining with the United States and Japan in the defense of Taiwan. So not only a stepping stone, they're trying to break what we call the Five Eyes Intelligence Alliance. And with New Zealand and Canada, I think they've got a large degree of success in trying to, pry off the weaker members. And so you see this already in, Australia, the United Kingdom, and America now have kind of an inner circle of the most trusted or kind of, close military alliances. And Canada is on the outside now. So
basically the Chinese manifesto is run the world by 2049, if not sooner. So I think it's pretty safe to say, like, it doesn't really matter what we do. They're going to keep their foot on the gas and their foot on our throat, basically.
Agree 100%. What matters to us, as self-respecting people, is how do we respond to that?
Right.
How do we, educate ourselves, and how do we get back together with our natural allies, which I include Taiwan in that, to combat this? Because you're right, they will not stop. Even if they meet failure, they've got other angles. And again, I don't want to give the idea that they're the strategic masters, that they can complete everything. What the idea I want to give is they're going to attempt it, and they've already got the plans in place.
Mm-hmm.
So they're thinking ahead, lawn ahead. If a wall comes up here, they have, 3 other directions to go, and they won't stop. So if we care about, our elections, if we care about the numbers of, opioid deaths going up and down, we have to respond in some way because they won't stop.
Interesting.
So if there was one thing that you wanted the viewer to take away from all of this, this is obviously very dense if somebody is listening and they haven't even, let's say they haven't even looked at the election interference stuff or any of the drug trade.
We have a pretty educated audience.
I think so as well. But
they'll be tapped in.
Yeah. But if there was somebody that was just completely green, what would be like the first breadcrumb that they should start looking at to start getting a full picture of this?
Yeah, I mean,
it could even just be your book too,
sex
right?
sells, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not driven by reading about this, but I mean, I am fascinated that another very powerful state is using underground mafias as a central tactic. So when you see that mansion, on the outskirts of Toronto, and you wonder, how do they afford that? A lot of these mansions are drug money. Some of them will have underground casino activity inside that's targeting your politicians. And this connects to the election interference story. I'm saying that if your viewers are interested, come to the Bureau, read my stories where I unpack this stuff at length. And as I say, a lot of this stuff, when I set out, was hard to believe. I told you about, law enforcement people telling me that, oh yeah, China is kind of strategically involved in human trafficking, or they leverage our open society, this and that. And, I don't buy it right away. So I'm saying, take this step. You're going to find interesting stories, that are proven in documents. They're proven by sources, the highest level of credibility. And it's going to be, it's written from a perspective that's not contrarian, but that's not, it's not trying to fit in with whatever is politically palatable. It's just trying to get to the truth of what matters.
I'm a firm believer that, if you're going to have a democratic country, you need to have an informed citizenry. So I highly suggest everybody to go check out your reporting with the Bureau.
So that's at thebureau.ca, correct?
Thebureau.news.
Bureau.news
is the URL. Yeah.
Is there anywhere else our audience can find you? Anything you're on, like Instagram, socials, Twitter?
Yeah. I'm on Twitter at Scooper Cooper.
Nice.
Been there since 2008 and still there. I'm also on LinkedIn. If you go to Reddit, sometimes you'll see my stories, and sometimes they'll very quickly get booted by whoever owns Reddit.
All right. Well, thank you so much for sitting down with us today, Sam. That's
thanks for coming to Ottawa.
Yeah, it was great. It was honestly, it was a nice drive. The city's pretty nice. It's a shame it's run by Trudeau, but I do actually like the place. So I appreciate you coming in. It was really great chat.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, awesome. Let's do it again.
All right, great. Cool. Bye, everybody.